Brazil.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. Salvador is the third largest city in Brazil. Nobody knows that. It's like
That sounds
it's
giddy.
Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Salvador, you know. So,
Whoa, Bahia.
exato, exato. Yeah.
Mais que nada.
Ah, see, yeah, mais que nada.
Hi, Barbara.
That's a great song.
Okay. So it's right at 7. Team, do you think we should wait a little while or wait a couple minutes or?
I have 4:04, which, you know, obviously is 7:04.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, me too.
I think we could wait
Okay.
for, I'm comfortable waiting like one more minute, maybe.
Okay.
You
And then
want?
since you're doing you can just start when you're ready to start.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, just before we get started, just as you see, everybody, we're recording, so this will be available for you to enjoy later and also share with friends.
Mhm.
Okay.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm looking at the screen and right in the middle, it says this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant.
Uh-huh.
And that's okay, but my concern is I can't see all of
Ah.
the screen with this message in the middle. And
I think
I'm,
if you click OK, it'll go away.
Is there there should be a little button that says got it?
Got it. Push the got it, and it'll disappear.
oh, thank you.
And also,
Where's the button to reverse the camera? Hi, Elaine. There should be a button because it's not looking at me, it's looking at my bedside table.
Oh my.
And that's
You know, usually there's a button usually at some place where you just, and then it swings the camera around the other way.
who's
Swing the computer around a little bit.
You have to move your computer.
No, then I won't be able to see the screen. It's the reverse kind of thing that you do, you know, when you do a
like
selfie.
on your iPhone.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they're on phone.
But but I'm on my iPad and I'm not sure how to do that.
Oh, I don't think we can.
Yeah, all the devices. So what I'm gonna, before we get started, folks, I'm just gonna ask that if everyone wouldn't mind muting themselves for kind of obvious reasons, like people's phones are ringing and because we really want to make sure that our recording of the readers is very clean and that they're not interrupted by, you know, by the normal things that interrupt, dogs barking, there's all kinds of things. So thank you very much. And Lynn, if you're good, we'll get started. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, bienvenidos. You're here today for, dare I say, and I'm biased, the fabulous West East bi-coastal poets of the pandemic and beyond reading. I'm one of your co-hosts for today, Sandy Yanone. I'm the author of Boats for Women from Salmon Poetry, and I'm joining you today from Olympia, Washington, representing the West in the West of the bi-coastal poets of the pandemic and beyond. Well, every other month, our quartet of co-hosts, Susanna H. Case, who unfortunately, but fortunately for her, but unfortunately for us, is not able to join us today. Susanna H. Case Lynn McGee and Carolyn Wright invite a poet that we each admire to create a tapestry, a quartet of poets who will marvel and dazzle you with their new books, relatively new books that have been published in the past year, and some have been published quite recently. You'll get to really enjoy a spectacular reading of their unique visions and voices that they bring to their poetry. And I believe it's their work. I'm fortunate enough to know the work of all four of these poets. Unmistakable and utterly necessary in these times and all times, across all times and across all time zones. Well, the readers that we will be hearing from today in this order will be Margo Taft Stever, Raul Sanchez, Meg Kearney, and Elaine Sexton. And each of Lynn, Carolyn, and I will have the pleasure of introducing each of them individually. Each poet will be reading for about 12 to 15 minutes. You'll be able to also see in the chat that the bios for each of the poets, as well as links to where you can purchase their latest collections, and also links to their websites where you can look for other of their work. We certainly encourage you to support the poets and their presses if you have the resources today to add some remarkable poetry that you'll be hearing today to your, what I imagine, because you're joining us here, is an extensive poetry collection that you each are curating for yourself.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. I'm Lynn McGee, and it's my pleasure to introduce Margo Taft Stever. I'd like to ask everyone to please mute themselves if you haven't already. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Denise Duhamel writes that the eco-poetry of Margo Taft Stever, quote, emphasizes our enmeshment with tragedies we have created, referring to the damage of the world's 6th mass extinction, the only one that is human caused. And I think that comment goes to the heart of what is both uncomfortable and compelling in Margo Taft Stever's most recent collection of poems, The End of Horses, from Broadstone Books. And that is their invitation to us, the reader, to accept our complicitness in the eco-tragedies, as Denise Duhamel names them, that they describe, such as moose calves leached of blood and killed by ticks enabled by global warming, or dolphins hung by hooks from ships so that they call out and attract others in their pod, enabling those in the tuna fishing industry to kill off the competition. In a sense, these and other poems in The End of Horses have the potential to recruit the reader into actions as seemingly small as not eating canned tuna, but they also, and I think even more importantly, and this is why they are, it's poetry, they recruit us to employ empathy. And that is why the eco poems in this collection belong alongside poems about family and menopause and the cultural experience of women, a dying mother who writes to her infant child, a woman mourning the mother whose death is so far in the past, quote, I have forgotten what bound us together, and two sisters as children riding double on a horse, longing for the beast's velvet nose to be buried in their arms. This is how you build consensus, through the heart. Please welcome Margo Taft Stever.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that wonderful introduction. And I would also like to thank Lynn McGee, Carolyn Wright, Sandy Yanone, and Susanna H. Case for organizing the West East Poets of the Pandemic and Beyond series, And I'm really happy to be reading with Elaine Sexton, Raul Sanchez, and Meg Kearney. And you saw the cover of the book, which is actually wild horses rescued by a Navajo family living in the Wind River Horse Sanctuary in Lander, Wyoming. And my proceeds from this book will go to the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. And as Lynn mentioned, many of the poems are about the sixth extinction, but some are also about the fragility of the human family. And I'm going to begin by the poem that she just talked about, Galloping Double Bareback. Down sandy edges of paved country roads without helmets, bareback, the sisters clung to each other, to the horse, to the tree-lined ways that snaked around and through, as if going somewhere were not the goal. Their bodies twinned, their hair wind-whipped, the triple rocking of legs pounding, the leaping beat of hooves. The girls struggled to stay the horse, rippling through them like storm. Wind-battered trees that framed the hush of birds, silenced by their galloping. The muddy paths, the mourning dove, soft-eyed windows of distant houses. Head down, the quieted horse plowed through grasses, his massive form sleek, willowy. So much did they long for the beast's velvet nose to be buried in their arms. And then I wanted to read a poem about one of the most dreaded parts of my high school experience, posture pictures. In 7th grade, Miss Plemons, she of the short cropped hair, behind the black curtain focused her camera obscura on our shuddering profiles, our nascent breasts. As we slumped forward, shoulders caved in, concealing what was barely there. The rage in the 50s and 60s, Yale and Princeton took them along with Mount Holyoke, Vassar, and the Oregon Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Later in class, she informed us the Nazis had amassed troves of college yearbooks for racial study, that the tobacco industry paid Professor W.H. Sheldon of Columbia's Institute of Physique Studies to find that smoking cigarettes made men more manly, but discovered instead it depleted sexual appetites. If she told us about Sheldon's study of human bodies to predict future achievement and prevent the breeding of useless humans, I'd forgotten. I can still see him on the flimsy photocopy that Miss Plemons passed around. His shaved head, his barely contained rage, that familiar sneer of a man who would spend his last lonely days reading detective stories, who believed he could judge people by the outlines of their silhouettes. It is quite amazing to remember how crazy things used to be in the past. Of course, they're probably just as crazy now, but we're just not as aware of it as we are of the past. And I've never read the next poem before in a reading. It was recently published, and this was recently published in the Mom Egg Review on mothering. And I chose to honor Denise Levertov, who influenced my life more than anyone else. MIT Poetry Workshop 1969 for Denise Levertov. At 3 a.m., 400 cops breached Harvard University Hall with clubs, helmets, visors, cans of mace, pushed 100 of us into a hallway, crushed and tear gassed us. Close to 75 injured, one ankle shattered. She would never take a normal step or run again. In paddy wagons, they hauled us to the Middlesex County Jail, boys in one cell, girls in another. In your MIT workshop, you told us we would meet only in our apartments, never in classrooms. You wanted to teach poetry to scientists. We demonstrated against the Vietnam War. When poets possess the ability to write, you told me, they do not own their gifts any more than people own land or animals. Poets are vessels from which poems emerge. Using a payphone, Mark and I called you from the protest against Hayakawa during his speech that January at Northeastern University. You were giving a poetry reading, but you didn't want to miss the protest. You brought several attendees to join the demonstration. We witnessed you emerging from the subway stop, your voice raised against the cops closing in, your arms waving through tear gas. Police bludgeoned the young men who accompanied you and dragged them away. Later, you looked over my photos of the Harvard strike to find one for your new collection, Relearning the Alphabet. You thought the image of the students looking out at students looking in the half-moon window resembled runes of an unknown language. I wanted to read one of my forays into sort of formal poetry, not very formal, but slightly formal. Birds at the Zoo. The urgency as Inca terns fly about as if their only thought is getting out, startles those unaccustomed to such struggle. The double-wattled cassowary takes another tack and freezes still as statuary in multicolored contemplation of her lot. Every summer, our family has gone to Biddeford Pool, Maine, a place that we have loved since the 1800s, and the setting for the next poem, Elegy for a Blue Spruce. Almost all had forgotten or never knew the spruce was one of 5 planted in spite to ruin the neighbor's view. 4 died. No one remembered the details of the feud. The alcoholic, so full of ill will, no one loved him. For 100 years, the tree grew with not much else to define the edge between sandy earth and beach. Only the spruce remained. Eagles and hawks found perches in high boughs. Swallows nested in flowing branches. A young woman married under the tree. Her whole family gathered. Only weeks later, a freak tornadic blast. The night before the storm, she pleaded with them, the spruce needs help, maybe severe drought, maybe water rising in the bay. They ran down to the shore to see the spruce undone. The regal blue lay in state, branches curved upwards, sparrows surrounded it in prayer. And actually, after I wrote the poem, I found out that my understanding of what actually happened was all wrong. So I have to redo the whole poem, but I haven't done that yet. The Nunnery. Path where none was before, nightingale, nightingale. Mosquitoes dog us past the nunnery. The picket fence snakes up the hill. Swallows barely visible, their wings glint under a narrow new moon. And I wanted to read the poem that Lynn referred to about the dolphins. And this poem I wrote in honor of the 1,100 dolphins that were hauled up on the shore of France several years ago. And they were mutilated by their attempts to get to the surface to breathe. And trawlers now work in pairs and drag a net between them. And as a result, the European dolphin is on its way to extinction unless something's done. Ballad of the Dolphin. Ancient Greeks said they should be treated as humans. Their sailors would not kill dolphins. How I have thought of you caught in the fishermen's nets. They would set them to trap you to catch the tuna that swam under your schools. How the fishermen hung you still alive upside down. Your cries brought others. Fishermen grabbed you by your tails, strung you and turned you head down in water, tied you to lifting hooks and dragged you to the docks. If any of you were still alive when they slung you on cement, they stabbed you. How last survivors churned the water red, leaping in panic, waiting to die. In a good catch, it took them 3 days to kill all of you. How mothers whose calves were entangled could not lift them to the surface. They listened to their helpless underwater clicks and sighs. How often I remember the whale skippers who would radio the location of hundreds of you, allowing tuna fishermen to track down your entire pod. Their nets deep, foaming wide, so that hundreds could fit inside. How they used underwater sound to confuse and drive you down. How many of you drowned? Fishermen did not want to compete with you, but killing you was not enough. How they used the screams of several to slaughter more. How one of you hangs from the prow, still alive, calling, calling. I'll read the title poem. And of course, the subtext of this poem would not have been understandable about 10 years ago, but I think it is now. End of horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look into dust bowls searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden trees, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda. And my last poem is also the last poem in the book, Ocean Birds. Jealous is the night, the feckless night coming over us as water into sea. The forceful day's geography turned black. Your body is the sea I float upon. Your skin becomes the waves. Nothing will ever bring you here to me. Nothing will ever call you back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margo. I have had the pleasure to hear you read a number of times from this collection. And I honestly, I want to start like a reading by Margo of the month club, so that I get to hear you read from this book every single month of the year. Because for me, it is such a prismatic book that has so many themes coursing through it. And every time I listen, I am astounded by how the images reach me differently.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your saying that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everyone, I am a little thrilled, a little overwhelmed, but certainly overjoyed to introduce today our next reader, Meg Kearney. And I think it's fantastic that we're going from a book titled The End of Horses to All Morning the Crows, which is Meg's latest collection. Meg, among other things, is, in my book, the ornithologist of poetry for all time, based on this book, All Morning the Crows. I first heard her read on Cultivating Voices live poetry, and I was astonished by her absolute unmistakable voice that sings her poetry as clearly as the bird songs appear in her poems. I love not only the voice of her poems, but I love the voice in which she shares the poems. As I said, bird songs or songs of birds, you will get to choose today. The collection, I might add, has acquired a number of well-deserved acknowledgements. And before I say a little bit more about the collection, I want to let you know that it's received the 2020 Washington Prize. It was a finalist for the best book of the year from the Poetry Society of New Hampshire. It was a finalist for the Forward Review's Indie Book Award. And it has been published by WordWorks Press. In the title poem, Crow, a few lines. It was a crow that taught me how to pry a thing open, to get at the story inside, to experience Meg's poetry is what it means to get to the stories inside each of us. Some of the stories we wished not to tell, and some we feel compelled to tell. She pries open a timetable of family secrets of the beloved, and her poems are constantly finding you like homing pigeons. These are poems that will never leave you once you hear them today. In addition to the music of the birds, there's the music, there's the symphony of other conductors at play. The music of Mozart, the music of Dvorak, and the musicality of her unique voice. She is a poet, a storyteller, as I mentioned, an ornithologist, all wrapped up in flights of language. Enjoy your flight this afternoon. Please welcome Meg Kearney.
Thank you so much, Sandy. You're an incredible introducer of poets. I'm always in awe whenever I listen to you. And it's especially astounding to be introduced by you. So thank you so much for your generous heart and mind. And thanks to Lynn and Carolyn for all of your hard work in keeping this fantastic series going. I've come to several of the readings and I've just always been amazed by the poets that you bring on. And what an honor to read with Margo and Raul and Elaine. And thank you to all the family and friends I see out there. There's a few of you who just made me very nervous, and I'm just going to try to just plow right through that. And Sandy had said something about, well, first of all, I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not really even, I put this out there in the front of the book, like I'm really not even a birder. I'm very much an amateur lover of birds. But there's a poem that I never forgot that I wanted to share with you before I read from All Morning the Crows. It's a very short poem that I heard in late 2001 after the 9/11 attacks. And it had been written by a third grader named Cameron Penny. And it was written as part of a school assignment. And I heard this poem through a friend of a friend, and I have said it at many readings over the years. Thought that maybe there would be no reason to after a while, but it keeps being an important poem to me, and I wanted to share it. So Cameron Penny says, if you are lucky enough in this life, a window will appear on a battlefield between two armies. When the soldiers look into the window, they don't see their enemies. They see themselves as children, and they stop fighting and go home and go to sleep. When they wake up, the land is well again. So that's Cameron Penny. Very, very wise person at a young age. And I hope wherever Cameron Penny is these days, he's still writing poems. So I'm going to start us off with Loon. So in All Morning the Crows, each poem is the title of a bird, but the poems aren't really about birds, which you'll figure out fairly quickly. Loon. I bought a cassette tape of loon calls so I could speak their language that summer I camped on Russet Pond. This was the 80s, so cassette tapes were the thing. Side A was for "Where are you? I am here," or "I am hungry" calls, meaning hoots, wails, and peeps. Side B was for aggression and distress, yodels and tremolos. The latter, a kind of alarm laugh that led to the saying, "crazy as a loon." Kids today don't have the chance to choose between side A and B. B, the poor man's intermission, or a sleeper song, second chance. But now I'm talking 45 records, 1972, with deeper and deeper on the B side of Billy Don't Be a Hero, which was more of a tremolo than a yodel, a sentimental, romantic, anti-war song that slew my heart in third grade. No one I knew liked deeper and deeper, though on Russet Pond I learned that loons with their solid bones can dive deeper and longer than most birds. And I found I preferred wails to tremolos, wails being the kind of call I'd perfected myself by then. Thanks. All right. This one is for my old friend, Rick Purnell. Plovers. And this is set Old Orchard Beach, Maine, summer 1985. Like these plovers, I'm just passing through. Plovers newly arrived from Florida along with the rest of the snowbirds. 75 El Camino, huffing like an old dog, is what got us here. The guys chugged beer the entire drive. Okay, so did I. Check out these plovers slinging back sandflies. Another one of those trips we were lucky to survive. Guidebook says that in medieval times, a plover could tell whether a man would live or die. Maybe some plover looked me in the eye as I poured myself onto this beach, more drunk than alive. Deemed me too dumb to die yet. Up beach, bodybuilders oil their biceps while the guys fetch margaritas from the tiki bar. One's my lover, the other along for the ride. Mark, like the apostle. I'm not really dumb, just 5 on a scale of 1 to. Guide says plover's name comes from the Latin word for rain, but doesn't explain why. Each time I say bride, Mark's face looks like rain. But who am I? Too good for what? Now the guys still at the bar wave frosted glasses, faces frosted too. No doubt they've sniffed a line. No booze, they mime, allowed on the beach. Coked up love, a loaded vow. Might not get better than that, I tell Mark. Tonight, this crowd will recede like the tide. Not the guys, too high, I'm sure, to find our motel. I'll dig a seat here in the sand, watch the moon rise. Plovers will sleep in the shallows where they hide. All right, hopefully we'll bring just a little bit of levity in here. This is Skimmer at the country club. Skimmers are the only birds that have vertically slit pupils, like a cat's. Skimmer at the country club. Our boss John was like that bird, skimmed the pool of our tips without getting his belly wet. His tongue was a blade that cut if we dropped a cup, or couldn't lift a six tops dinner on a single tray. We girls held each other up, helped each other out like POWs in a work camp. Desperate for money, we would have revolted if we'd known he was feeding off us night and day shift, and especially during weddings when the bride's father, always more shell-shocked than trashed, slipped John extra cash for the lovely staff. He skimmed that the way his namesake skims an estuary at high tide, fast and efficient. We suspected, but could not catch him until one summer evening, Chef spied the top of John's head flying not quite low enough below the kitchen window. In his arms, a case of Veuve Clicquot. Chef tackled him while Dora called the cops, who arrived to find John's Lexus stocked with the club bar's top shelf. We always said he had good taste. He'd hired us. We partied late that night, toasted the sight of John in cuffs and John's last glance at us, his coked up pupils wild, pissed, slit like a skimmer's or a snake's. That's to all you who had to waitress in a past life. Or maybe still do. Okay. House Finch. I was trying to pick kind of spring, summer poems as kind of like a running theme here. All East Coast rep here. Displaced New Yorker living in New Hampshire. This is House Finch. This is set on Long Island, New York in 1940. So back in the late 30s, these pet dealers in California were capturing house finches out in California and bringing them to New York to sell as pets. But this, of course, was illegal. And before they were caught, a lot of these pet dealers released house finches all over Long Island. Okay, House Finch. Most arrived in wood and wire cages, some in brass domes, all to be sold as pets to lovers under umbrellas packed spoke to spoke on Jones Beach, or to the Smiths of Smithtown enjoying their backyard beer and barbecue afternoons. Soon the house finch, let loose, would populate the East just as the Smiths and Joneses were doing, copulating like good Catholics until even the gulls couldn't compete. But that summer, 1940, Hollywood finches were as exotic as Mai Tais, another splash of California newly arrived to the North Shore. There, the Smiths still preferred their Budweiser and Irish whiskey, but they did applaud the release of the finches. My first mother was a young girl then, maybe 30 inches tall, barely big enough to fetch Papa Smith a beer. She had nothing to fear, warbling around the yard like a bird. She didn't yet know how a cage can spring up around you, spirit you away and alone. She didn't yet know that once the door clicks shut behind you, there's no going home. Okay, 2 more. Thank you. This is Limpkin, and I'm just going to read you my kind of go-to book, my prompt that I used when I was writing these poems is a book called 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names by Diana Wells. So I quote her pretty extensively throughout the book, and in the back I have all these notes. So Limpkin. The Limpkin's cry is a quality of unutterable sadness, as though the bird is wailing in despair at the desolation of its watery surroundings. So that was my jumping off point for Limpkin. Eliza Summer was hanging socks on the backyard line when she heard it. Clothespins rained on the ground. Lord have mercy, she prayed. Her hound lifted his head to howl, then changed his mind. Diane Johnson and her son Kip were peeling potatoes when they heard it. Out on their porch, Kip still held his knife. Diane touched his arm as if to ask, "Hear that?" Kip claimed it was a bird, but Eliza knew it was that newlywed girl in the old white house, Mary. It was a Limpkin, Kip insisted. The swamp. His mother clucked. What did a boy know about heartbreak? When Jen Kroll heard it, she called her father for the first time in 13 years. Joe Sprague slipped in the tub when he heard it, and Paul Hogue at the diner shook coffee in his eggs. Diane whispered, "That Mary came in the clinic last week, forearm shredded like..." She took Kip's knife, nudged him, "Go shoot baskets." Sissy Freer cut off the tip of one braid with a tree pruner when she heard it. Diane wished she didn't know about Mary. Inside the house, she crossed herself, lit the wrong end of a cigarette. When she called him in, Kip missed his shot. He knew plenty about heartbreak. He'd had a father. Thanks. I'm just gonna read one last one, and thank you for being such a great, generous audience. And thanks again for inviting me to read. I'm gonna end with Duckling Swan. And I think everybody knows the story of the duckling and the swan, or the duckling who becomes a swan. Before I was born, I was biggest of the clutch, already a burden and slow to hatch. When at last I smashed my way into this world, my mother's tongue unfurled a hiss. Siblings snickered and jeered. Who could love an ugly girl smothered in egg wax, gray as the curl in a drowned man's lip? Even cleaned up, my down was ash. I was the art of my mother's mistake, the ache in her dinosaur heart. I was the winter, the ice over early, no fish in the pond, and the hunter's sure shot. I had nowhere to go when they drove me out. I went like something dead in Coyote's mouth, like something a cat had mauled, then tossed about. I starved through the full moons, slept in the snow. But by spring, a lake was aglow with my gleaming. In spring, I returned and blinded them all. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you. Thanks. Sandy, love that bird.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meg. That was absolutely wonderful. And I put a note in the chat that you should have some of those poems featured on Bird Note. The short radio segment, it's on public radio, a lot of radio stations, public radio stations. It started here in Seattle at the station KNKX, back when it was KPLU, part of Pacific Lutheran University. But you really should. I mean, they've featured poems by Ada Limon, and you've written a whole series of poems about that involve birds. So you should definitely be contact them. I don't know who to contact, but I'm
Thanks,
sure they will be
Carolyn.
interested.
I'll write that down. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, and check
much.
the chat also.
Thank
So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my friend and fellow Seattle dwelling poet. Actually, we are on Duwamish and Coast Salish indigenous land, but we call it Seattle at this point. Raul is truly a poet of community, not just his community of origin, which would be Mexico, Aztec, Nahuatl, and all of the indigenous peoples of Mexico, but this whole community of poets and young people and older people. And he says things like, he made a wonderful statement on a program, and I'm going to post the links for these. He said, words are like clothes we wear them on our tongues. And this was for a radio, he was featured on television on King 5, one of the major stations. And I'm just going to post this in the chat so that you can take a look at it later. About his poetry pole, which is this sort of glass-doored cabinet posted on a telephone pole in front of his house in the Lake City neighborhood of Seattle, not far from here. And on that poetry pole, people are invited to post poems, bring copies of their own poems, and affix them, inside the glass cabinet. And if you do multiple copies, people will come and take copies for themselves, a poem in your pocket. And also, people are invited to post their own poems. So when Raul was the poet laureate of Redmond from 2019 to 2021, and Redmond is a city near Seattle, it's just across Lake Washington from larger Seattle, but they've been wonderful about having various poets. You don't have to live in Redmond. I think you just have to be in the greater Redmond area to apply. But Raul did wonderful work, all of it during COVID. And his, the poetry poll, besides all the readings that he organized on Zoom and his work with juveniles, he's worked in a program called Pongo, which is for juveniles in detention. He's also taught poetry for the Jack Straw Cultural Center in Seattle, and he continues teaching in the Writers in the Schools program for Seattle Public Schools, which is part of Seattle Arts and Lectures. And you can see a lot more of that on his website, which has just been posted very kindly by, let's see who posted it. Let's see, it was somebody posted it. Anyway, thank you. But when he created the poetry poll, that got a lot of attention from the media, which is wonderful because, you know, poetry doesn't always get all that much attention from the greater world out there. So I just posted the two articles. One was the feature in the Seattle Times Pacific Northwest magazine, and the other was the feature on King TV, King 5 TV. So, and the other thing about Raul that I just really appreciate is, as a poet of community, he loves to bring people over to his house, not just to visit the poetry poll outside his house, but to come in. Because the other thing that Raul does, he is a wonderful artist, and I would say he's a wonderful sort of folk artist. He creates these wonderful altars, these Day of the Dead altars, retablos del Día de los Muertos, which is, you know, at the beginning of November every year. And he has a number of people, you know, poets and other friends, neighbors, and people come over to his house, and there are readings and performances of music and wonderful food, Mexican food, South Asian food, all kinds of amazing food. So it's sort of a potluck, as the poetry poll is sort of a poetry potluck. So it is my great honor to present to you Don Raul Sanchez, whose indigenous name is Tlaltecatl. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Raul, you can correct me. And this is his most recent book, When There Were No Borders. And I'm going to hold up his previous book, which is All the Brown-Skinned Angels. There it is. So welcome, Raul. Bienvenido.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sandy, Carolyn. What a wonderful introduction. I try to keep myself, you know, sort of anonymous and quiet in things that I do. Don't like to make a lot of noise, because there's no point in that. It's just to be able to share and participate in the community and continue to write poems. And my main focus is the youth. They are the future. And one thing that I tell them when I'm in the schools is that I tell them, you are here and I'm way up here. I already traveled all this path from where you are. So maybe we can meet in the middle. I can help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made. So we have that connection. So they understand that, and they are able to listen to me and, you know, participate in the writing exercises that we do. And most of them I deal with kids that have 2 or 3 different cultures behind them. So some of them might be learning Spanish as a second language besides English. On top of that, they have their language that they may carry from their homeland. Could be from Guatemala, Honduras, or somewhere else. So it is a challenge, but it's a beautiful challenge, because I'm able to make them understand that by writing, the writing process is essential to be able to demonstrate and express what they feel and they have inside, and what they want and what they don't like at the same time, in a poem, well written or as best as they can. And they all have done wonderful work, wonderful job. For the last 2 years, the 2 schools that I work with, Denny International and Mercer Middle School, they have come up with their anthologies with the poems. And this year, they are going to do the same. So speaking of books, I'd like to start with this one, with a theme about spring. This poem is titled Daffodils and Dandelions. It's published in a little handmade book called Poetic Impressions. And this was printed on, I have it right here. Printing was accomplished on a 1911 Chandler and Price 10x15 letterpress. So all made by hand by my friend Griffith H. Williams, who is also from Welsh origin. Okay. Daffodils and Dandelions. In a sea of green, tall green grass, yellow boys stand, some high, some low. Not all the daffodils grow in groups, unlike the dandelions. Perhaps their roots are different. The dandelions, unlike the daffodils, have medicinal benefits. The daffodils are gorgeous, always ready to kiss the sun. But the dandelion provides more than kisses. It can heal from within. Yellow medicine from the ground up. And there's a footnote. In traditional Chinese and Native American medicine, dandelion root has long been used to treat stomach and liver conditions. Herbalists today believe that it can aid in the treatment of many ailments, including acne, eczema, high cholesterol, heartburn, gastrointestinal disorders, diabetes, and even cancer. So go get your dandelion roots and boil them, mash them, and drink the tea. It's good for you. Okay, next, I cannot avoid this poem. This is from my first book, All Our Brown Skin Angels. This was written after, with the idea of 9/11, even though it was 10 years later. And the poem applies to what's going on right now in Ukraine. What matters? Here is the matter. All things we see in the world, we must refer to in language by words with strange names. Atoms are the matter we see. We give names: stainless steel, sand, stones, and paint. And these same things have different names: acero inoxidable, arena, piedras y pintura, rust-free stahl, oder sand, felsen und schminke. What we make with these things, how we use those things is relevant, edifying, constructive. We remove the sand and stones to erect steel towers, adorn the towers with stainless steel and glass windows made out of sand. We make guns from steel and bullets with lead. We make cannons to blast somebody else's towers back to the sand and rocks. What matters is what we do with all things. Destroying other people's buildings and cities is pointless. Now I have something new for you. It is titled Pressure Wash. And the idea behind this poem, I was thinking about the year that I spent in India and submerging myself in the rivers for anointment, etc., cleansing. And that day I happened to be washing the decks, so therefore pressure wash. Removing all layers, hardened pollen, grit, embedded dust, weathered reminders, past seasons, washing, cleansing, renewal. Familiar words leaning on absolution. I've spent 2 days removing those layers, not on me or on myself, but on the decks. I wonder if absolution would be granted to those who, like the wood on the deck, accumulated scabs of hardened dirt and guilt, unnoticeable but heavy on the self. In India, submerging our bodies in the holy rivers is equitable to absolution. I wonder if I have been, or if I will ever be absolved. So that idea of cleansing. The next poems are from a new book. And I'll start with this one. It has a lot of allusions to the things I remember growing up. 1960. 5 years young or younger, I was standing, walking, black and white photos taken, now fading in the memory of my past. Growing up at my mom and dad's restaurant right next to the biggest bullfighting arena in the world, Plaza Mexico, where everything began. Meanwhile, Jack Kerouac getting high in my CD, jazz poet, 242 blues choruses written in an afternoon jam session, And I came back spitting pulque in borracho org saloons of old sour Aztec, asking for more. My father enrolled me in a private American school, Escuela Rickards, from kindergarten to 5th grade. My best friends then were Sally, Dick, and Spot. Scared of Santa Claus, learned about Halloween before I revered the Day of the Dead. Once I stole 2 hours from a day. I don't remember the week, month, or year, but I did it. It was the day when I put the early bird songs in my pocket after listening to the sound of young ladies clacking heels and castanets with amorous echoes nailed down to the soulless songs sung by drunken patrons at the restaurant my father owned, where the jaguars don't stop, nor the wounded beggars, nor the condors descending from the Andes' higher peaks. I stole 2 hours. I filled them with roses, words, feelings, and metaphor, rhyme, and me. Above the subway, below the heavens of this earth, where I stood still. That's what I remember. Next is a poem titled Milagros. Milagros, if anybody from the Catholic religion or, those little pieces of metal that people pin down on the saints to ask for a favor, those are called milagros. Milagros. Have you ever pinned down a milagro on the cloth of your favorite saint? Tiny silver and brass charms offered to thank for blessings received, a house for the broken home, a split heart for the lost love, praying for the lover to come back, a hand for the injured laborer or the writer that can't write, a mouth for those who speak ill words, praying they'll heal, a food to complete the journey, to be able to move around, unconfined, unassisted, a body for the departed, or for the living, wishing they come home safe after deployment to wars on foreign lands, and the migrants crossing deserts to arrive safe to the promised land, or their home away from this world. Milagros, testimony of love, a promise of faith and hope. So in this book, there's a lot of traditions and culture. Perhaps some of them you might not even be aware of that they exist, but they're here. Next, immigration. Humans have been moving around the world forever, ever since we existed. So why it's such a new news that people are migrating? Praise for the walking warriors. This is for all the migrants, the shoeless, the desperate, the risk takers, the caring fathers and mothers, the elders, the young bloods, the babies, the laborers, the engineers, the aspiring writers, the ones who want to get ahead, the humans with colored skins, kissed by the sun, the ones who are no longer dreaming, the ones who know the land, the ones who harvest our fruits and vegetables, the ones who take care of our elders, the ones who cook our food, the ones who sing hymns and turn prayer wheels, the poor ones, the unafraid, the women who were raped, the young women who want their children to have a better life, to all who desire and strive for freedom. That's my praise for the walking warriors. Let's see. Everybody loves Mexican food, right? Sometimes they don't even know the origins or how some things are made. But this one will bring you that flavor in your mouth and you can smell it as I read it. Because in fact, my wife made that just today. Salsa verde. Mother roasted tomatillos whole, serranos, onion on comal stove top. Pungent air permeated swells of flavor. Tomatillos turned yellow with dark burnt spots. Time for her hands to grind tomatillos, chiles with mortar, salt chunks, garlic, clove, fresh cilantro, crushing, blending, turning mortar, churning delicious salsa on molcajete grinding stone. Steamy, spicy smell, tickle my nose, spicy pleasure, eaten on tortillas, tostadas, my tongue on fire. Oh man, give me more. I'll wash it down with tequila, gift from the gods. Mother's salsa made on molcajete, grinding stone. If you don't know what a molcajete is, it's a round big bowl made out of a single big rock, and it's carved, and it comes with a mortar, and there you churn and churn and churn. Best flavor. Forget the blender. Okay. I'm gonna skip this one because it's about this is in the new book too. This is titled Your Body. No, sorry, The Shelter of Your Chest. Well, almost on the body. Actually, this little background on this poem, I took this to a workshop with David Wagoneer many years ago, and he liked it, and he made a lot of comments about it. And of course, he picked me first because I was the only dark-skinned fellow in the workshop. Everybody else was, different, just white people. But he liked it, he praised it, and here it is, it lived. The shelter of your chest. Guard my backside from the thin knives of their dreary eyes. Guard me between azaleas and marigolds. Guard me between wood and musk in your misty meadow. Guard me between the roots of cedar and maple in your snow-covered mountains. Guard me, burrowed in the wet sand, ocean, waves, brush. Guard me between twilight and the early light, between mist and rain, thunder and snow, in the rainbow. Guard me between azure and purple. Guard me between the sheets of your bed, tucked in like bold socks. Guard me from disdain. Guard me inside, outside, over, under, beside your chest. Let us guard each other from the fallible. Keep the torchlight on. Raise your red rose. I am your warrior. And I'll say goodbye with the last one from my first book. It is titled Breath. At day's end, we try to remain bright. Speak colorfully, for words are like the clothes we wear. We wear them on our tongues. Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, Caroline, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Raul. Muchísimas gracias.
That was wonderful. Raul, it's wonderful to hear you read. It's the first time that I've heard you read, and I've heard about you, of course, and was excited to hear your work for the first time. So thank you. That was great. I am now going to introduce our fourth poet, our last poet for the evening or the afternoon, and then Carolyn Wright is going to close us out. So it is my pleasure to introduce the poet Elaine Sexton, whose most recent book, Drive, was released from Grid Books in Boston earlier this year. In the style of that book's introductory poem and one other in the collection, I will say that the most beautiful thing about Drive is the surprise each poem delivers. And the most beautiful thing about the surprise is the elegance of the words. And the most elegant thing about the words is the truth they carry. As Eamon Grennan puts it, the poems in Drive alert us to the simple truth that everything is part of some bigger mystery. Jeet Thayil says that the collection brings a life lived in poetry to a startling new premise: acceleration equals exhilaration. And Vijay Seshadri points out that the poems are unstoppable and that they insinuate themselves into the reader's consciousness with such love and exquisite tenderness. The tenderness Seshadri describes joins forces with tangible events at the heart of their narratives. The early loss of a father, the loss of a brother and others, the steady gaze of the poems grounded by images as visceral as the human heart, acting as a kind of turbine, a rotary engine taken apart in the poem, How to Draw a Heart, or birds building nests in the twisting chords of power lines in the unexpected love poem, Landscape with Power Lines. So be prepared for some surprises, the acceleration of beauty, and please welcome Elaine Sexton.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for for a lovely introduction. And I just have to say, of all the readings I've participated in and been to, it's so lovely to have introductions that don't just list where you've been published and dates and publications, like some hierarchy. But it's really nice to have thoughtful introductions that say something about the work. So thank you for that. And I also want to point out, as that many of you know, that the 4 people who curate this series are all working poets, and the time they take to promote the work of other poets is, time out of their own work. And so I really appreciate Lynn, Sandy, Susanna, and Carolyn for doing that. So thank you for that. And of course, I'm a little nervous. I'm coming last, so I've followed 3 really wonderful poets, and boy, are we different. Each one of us are so amazingly different, and it's just, again, a pleasure. And lastly, I want to thank I have so many friends here tonight. This is your life kind of evening tonight. I have 2 dear old friends from San Francisco who tuned in tonight, and others that mean a lot to me. So thank you everyone for coming. So, all right. So I'm going to read from, my book, I'm going to read from my new book, Drive, which is just a couple of weeks old. This is only the 2nd reading I'm giving for this, since the book came out. And so I don't know if you can see this. So the cover, the image on the cover of the book, thank you, Lynn, is by the artist Catherine Bradford. And part of my life has in the last 20 years has been spent as an art critic. And I interviewed this artist, Catherine Bradford, about 8 years ago. And I carried this postcard of this kind of suspended woman around with me for, I don't know, months before I interviewed her. Anyway, this is an image from that series. So the title of the book, Drive, represents this idea, the word drive as a verb and a noun. Many of the poems take place in a car or some mode of transportation, but the word drive also as ambition, volition, passion. So the poems kind of navigate what I think of as a kind of a literal and then a metaphoric mode of transportation. So all right, enough said about that. I'm going to just jump in with a poem called Self-Portrait Between the Car and the Sea. I think I'll stay blonde a while longer. Downshifting for the view today, the engine strains in first gear the way on foot my body climbing the last few steps does. You would hear it too if the heart had a literal voice. Silently pulling for itself, the will wants the body to give it what it wants. How long will these parts last? I put off minding the flags lifting their faces. I watch sea lice flit from shell to sand to beach, eased by transition lenses. I might have mentioned that the poems have to do with aging as well. The next poem I'm going to read, Lynn mentioned a line from, is a prose poem called How to Draw a Heart. And this takes place in a train. The arteries of the turbine, as seen from the train, are actively compressing God knows what as we shuttle past Deer Park Station. I think I read it was jet fuel to fuel engines and jet engine components produced here, parts as small as the smallest rotors of dental drills and full-scale motor armatures like those of the heart, which is as close to a turbine as anything else in the body. I guess the stomach too is a turbine, but I don't see the stomach illustrated on any Hallmark cards. No doily accompanied tubes to say, I love you, though the stomach is the first to know. Something's up. I'm sorry, so the stomach is the first to know that something's up is really for the first. I'm sorry, I'm going to start this back. I guess the stomach too is a turbine, but I don't see the stomach illustrated on any Hallmark cards, no doily accompanied tubes to say, I love you, though the stomach is really the first to know if something's up before the heart kicks in. The engines to the intimate, holding infinitely complex hinges that swing with desire. We keep trying to illustrate desire as if desire were something one could draw as an expression of love, something possible to construct. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing in this light. 1 second. This next poem is the title poem called Drive, and I didn't realize that Meg and I have New Hampshire in common. I grew up on the coast of New Hampshire. And so this poem takes place in a car. A number of years ago, my brother was very ill. I live in New York City, and I was driving back and forth to New Hampshire almost every weekend or every other weekend. And I was always driving home to New Hampshire and leaving. When I left New Hampshire, I was driving home to New York. And so this space in between where you're really nowhere when you're in a car is the space that this poem occupies. Right, try and get my focus better here. Drive. My tiny car's tiny engine groans and hums the way my mother hummed a little ditty when nervous, the way I do, mulling over something hard, letting my chest send a message to my mouth forming a kind of growl while all along staying shut. I enter the on-ramp to the freeway heading home from a family visit, the pedal to the floor. I pump my chin toward the dashboard, thinking I'm helping. I think I hear my brother's taunt. What is it with women and cars? We are old enough to equate mobility with independence. Real wheels take me out of state, escaping the trap I thought was the small town. For this, I left the ocean, I left the trees, I left Eel Pond with seabirds standing on spring ice, summer surfboards lined up on the berm between the seagrass and the sea. I left my family of origin, my Lucky buried in the backyard, dog heaven, now home to a chalet built by strangers. The chicken coop, the barn gone. When driving, I think of love as a road trip. The soaring, the breakdown, the jump starts, the brand new and old reliable. I'm no mechanic, though I once knew how to change a fan belt sheared to a thread. Here the air is fresh. The new mutt who travels with me leaves her nose prints on the passenger windows the way my old dog did, leaving a spot just clear enough to drive through. Run. I am walking and talking at first, then humming, picking up the pace, my stride following the singing, which begins as a strum until a clicking reminds me that fuel, which is matter, which is mind, which is idea, is not endless and only as fertile as the working brain allows. The brain we take for granted, which could fail at any time. And that clicking, I begin to walk faster, unused to the acceleration of unknowing how to keep up with losing, a fading of something that is not firm, graspable, watching it go, a voice which is now singing as if voice were light, and the sun is that shot in the dark that cries, run. This next poem is called Landscape with Power Lines. And I drafted this poem about, I moved into a new house, a house in Long Island across from a tree farm. And first morning I woke up and I looked out and all I could see were these thick power lines that I hadn't ever noticed before. And almost immediately the Pollyanna in me decided I'm going to just have to kind of, I don't know, accept the power lines are going to be there and not forever, mar my pleasure of being in a beautiful place. Landscape with power lines. The twisting chords no longer bother me. As I see it, they heighten the light, halved and halved again, leaves and clouds, snow and storm. The breeze moves an olive branch over one line, then another below. Each branch acts as if her leaves aren't about to be swayed to stay on one side for good. They remain undecided. Today, they are subject to a dust kicked up as a truck hauling crops powers past. Birds make their wild plans to nest one last time. They weave their sticks and tissue their housing, including these lines. We are bound to live together. I think so. That poem also was drafted or finished during the election, the last election. So there was some politics involved there. This next poem is called Driving, and there's some italicized text here that I'll tell you what they are. They're lines from an Emily Dickinson poem. And if one of the lines is, if anyone strikes me on the street, I can return the blow. And the other line is alone and in a circumstance. So just so you know, if you were reading this on the page, you would see that that text is not my own. Driving. There are still dead zones in America where no one lives and satellites turn a deaf ear. It was only because of the light leaving the sky, ice forming on the glass of my stalled car, I entered the sedan of a stranger, a man who stopped on the interstate in one of those red states shaped like a box. There are still strangers who stop for a woman in distress and think only of her distress. If anyone strikes me on the street, I can return the blow, the reclusive poet wrote, alone and in a circumstance. But what did she know? That last line, I think I wrote it, what did she know? Or what did she know? Thinking about the time, what it was like to be a woman in Emily Dickinson's time. And now, of course, it's on everybody's mind right now, what it's like to be a woman in these times. And this next poem, again, and again, many of these, almost all these poems were written prior to the pandemic. But of course, all of them feel and read differently now, not just due to the pandemic, but due to the politics of this time. So this is a poem, a cento, which is made up entirely of lines not of my own. They're all movie titles of films made by or about, made by women or about women. And one sings, the other doesn't. A cento, movie titles beginning and ending with Agnes Varda. One sings stormy weather, Gone with the Wind, Clueless. Miss Congeniality, The Help, The First Wives Club, In a League of Their Own, Wild. She's beautiful when she's angry, Death Proof. All About My Mother Set It Off, A Girl Walks Home Alone, A Question of Silence, An Unmarried Woman. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. But are they? The women, the hours, itty titty bitty committee, Bad Girl, Women Without Men, Sweetie, The Stepford Wives, even cowgirls get the blues. I am somebody if these walls could talk. Lipstick under my burqa, the little girl who lives down the lane, legally blonde, goddess remembered, the love witch, born in flame, vagabond. I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to close with two poems, and Lynn very cleverly adopted a, so I have, while I was working on this book, I wrote, I'd say dozens of poems that circled around this idea of the most beautiful thing about blank is blank, and sort of circumventing the whole structure of poetry, which you usually get to that point. The most beautiful thing about whatever you're talking about happens in the turn. And I start with that turn in the poem. So I'm going to read one poem called Ride. And the most beautiful thing about a convertible is hair. And the most beautiful thing about hair is its disposition, dead but alive in the skin, in the air. The skin holding on to each strand for dear life, alive in the wind. The most beautiful thing about the wind passing over the skin is sensation, cellular, invisible, metabolic. What is metabolic is life-sustaining, and the most life-sustaining thing I can think of today is decency. And decency is blind, unseen, until it isn't. And the last poem, and again, thank you everyone for coming. The last poem I'm going to read is actually the epigraph to the book, and it's another poem that uses that structure, and it's a prose poem. The most beautiful thing about my car is the beach, and the most beautiful thing about the beach is watercolor, and the most beautiful thing about water is the word, and the most beautiful thing about the word is pigment, and the most beautiful thing about pigment is the soil, and the most beautiful thing about the soil is the earth, and the most beautiful thing about the earth is the sea, and the most beautiful thing about the sea is the drive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And
Thank
thank you, all the other poets, Raul, Meg, Margo, and all my fellow curators. This has been a wonderful event. I'm going to go get off speaker view and be on gallery view so I can see who all is here. We are, we're always so thrilled with these readings, and the thought that they come to an end, in these Zoom rooms, and the Zoom room shuts down so abruptly since we can't go off into the evening or have cookies and coffee or tea or go out for a drink or whatever, down the street. But, we're going to continue having these events via Zoom for now until we don't know, as the pandemic continues, and we want to continue to be here in this space, in the pandemic and beyond. And so our next reading is scheduled for July 10th, Sunday, July 10th. And we have, let me see, somewhere I had opened the, yes, I had opened the Zoom or the Google Drive to show what we're doing. We will be having readings in July 10th. And then again, what's the next one? September 11th. That will be a heavy date for two reasons. One, of course, it's what here in North America we call 9/11. And of course, in Latin America, in Chile, it is, the 11 de septiembre, the first 9/11, the US sponsored, supported military coup that overthrew the great, the fully democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile. So, you know, that's two different 9/11s that we will be looking at in some way at that time. And after that, the next reading after that will be Sunday, November 13th. So that's what's sort of on the agenda now. So far for Sunday, July 10th, we have one poet confirmed, and that is the wonderful New York-based poet, New York State-based poet. In fact, I believe she's in Woodstock, New York, Judith Kerman, who is also the founding director, publisher, editor of Mayapple Press. And I'm going to advocate to our group that it may be possible to have a few of the Mayapple Press published poets be part of that reading. And I have one in mind already. She is Eugenia Toledo, who is Seattle-based when she's not in the south of Chile, in her native Temuco, Chile. And that's where she is right now. She and her husband, David, were down in Chile beginning at sort of the end of 2019, and then COVID hit, and they have stayed there the whole time. So much for her will depend upon her Wi-Fi, the quality of her internet. But Mayapple has published a number of other poets as well, and you know, we're going to see what we can do about that. And in fact, I will also be zooming in from Salvador, Bahia, Brazil at that time. So let's see if part of our crew can be coming from Latin America at that time. Well, you know, Eugenia and I will be in the same time zone, which is one time zone ahead of Eastern time, sort of like the Maritime, the Canadian Maritime zone. So and also it will be winter down there, although winter in Brazil is kind of like, what, summer in Seattle. In any case, so if anybody, I would love to have everybody unmute themselves. Can we do that? And have a big round of applause for all the poets and for all our participants, listeners and audience. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
Gracias. Muito obrigada para todos. And,
Gracias.
you know, let's hope that we can meet again here in the Zoom room on July 10th in the same time zones. If you will be in the same time zone on July 10th, you will know when and where to find us. And Sandy, what are you holding up?
I think that's the bluebird of happiness.
It's the bluebird of happiness. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let me get more.
A hand-blown glass bird.
I love to hold up my
Thank you,
my
Sandy.
heart doily. There we go. The red doily of my heart.
I'd like to show something to Meg. This is I was scrambling to find this book. This actually has all the, I just put batteries in it because I couldn't remember where I put it. So wherever you open it.
Oh, cool.
Wow. Oh, I have to have this.
Oh,
You
amazing.
can hear the sound of the birds. Wait.
Wow.
Wow. Raul, where did you get this book?
A neighbor had it on his front yard, so.
Wow.
Wow. It's called Birdscape?
Yeah.
It's called Birdscapes. It's by the Cornell Lab of
It's by
Ornithology.
Cornell Lab. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
so on
I
each
actually
page,
belong to them.
there's a different sound, a different bird.
Wow.
If we had a moment, I would go get our plush. We have a plush raven, which does the raven call, the raven hoot, but maybe I'll save that for another time. It's out in the living room.
That's awesome. Thank you, Raul. I'm definitely, that's gonna be even a gift to some people too.
Yeah. Raul, I'm gonna have to come over if the poetry poll is still up. I still have this sheaf of poems. They're sitting right here. I had this to bring. I had this whole thing to bring to you. It's one of my poems, and I think another one is some of Eugenia's poems, but we'll
You can
see.
even,
If I can,
you can put them in a plastic bag, put it by the door, then I'll make copies of the single poems to put them in there.
All right, actually, I have about a dozen or more of this, but I can make more.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Sandy. Good meeting,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Meg.
everyone, and shout out to Jan
Thank
and
you.
Jeanette. Hi,
Yes,
Sabrina,
Jan.
oh, and
thank
I
you.
also wanted to say hello to Jeffrey
Fran and
Harrison,
Carol.
whom I have not seen in at least a dozen or more years. And it's great that you've been attending today. I was meaning to say something. I finally, before we close down, I'm glad you're still here. And I'm glad that Meg did not get shut out by the thunderstorm.
I know. I was like, oh no.
Elaine, get home
Here
safe
we
to
go.
Miami.
And
Oh.
Gabriela,
Yeah.
thank you also for attending. Muchísimas gracias por aparecer
Thank you.
aquí, and we will be in touch, everybody.
Right.
was a
Thank you,
pleasure.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Right.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank
Carol.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Until
Thank
next
you.
time. Okay.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Bye.